What's going on? Ryan here with Intersection Records, and last night I saw the legendary Bob Dylan again. My first Bob Dylan show in 15 years, but my 15th overall, or 14th show overall. I've seen Bob now in 5 different decades, and last night made me realize that maybe I shouldn't have taken a 15-year break and been seeing him, because he was absolutely fantastic. I went with my father-in-law. We had lawn tickets at Riverport Amphitheater, but we were able to upgrade to the 8th row center for the Outlaw Music Festival. And I'll shoot a review of the Willie Nelson concert and Nathaniel Rateliff shows as well. Bob Dylan was great. You know, he had a band that was new for me, and I think some of these guys are new. Tony Garnier's been there for 40 years. So Tony's been in the band pretty much the entire time I've been seeing Bob. But Bob Britt was on guitar, kind of lead guitar. He was fantastic. Doug Lancio also on guitar. And then the great Anton Fig on drums. Figs plays in Joe Bonamassa's band. He was on David Letterman's band for 30 years and played with a lot of people. Great musicians in this 5-piece band. They were tightly knitted into the center of the stage. They were pressed back away from the edge of the stage. Bob was playing piano all night. Bob played some harmonica last night. And Bob was great last night. You know, again, seeing him so many times from 1989 to 2010, you know, and as Bob says, you got to serve somebody. After seeing him all those times, in like 13 or something like that times, 14 times, I was just kind of done seeing Bob Dylan. And, you know, I see lots of shows, and I've gone down other pathways in music since then. And I'm glad that I went back to this show. We're going to get into this song by song. You know, Bob's famous for lots of things. You know, Bob's famous for some of the great albums of all time, like Highway 61 and Bringing It All Back Home, 2 of my favorites. Bob's also famous for rearranging structurally songs that he is famous for. And he certainly did that on the opening number, Gotta Serve Somebody, which is off like 1978's Long Train Coming. It was unrecognizable to a certain extent. And I was telling my father-in-law, they started the song off with drum fills like you'd be ending a song, and always kind of crescendoing out with these fills like you're ending a song, but you're beginning and you're playing the song that way the entire way. It was a cool rendition of the song. Bob played 4 covers last night, just straight covers. The first one was the second song of the night. I can tell by Bo Diddley. I was not familiar with that song. Blues oriented. You know, Bob is a blues artist. Bob is, you know, known for folk music and doing a folk music scene in the early 60s and then going electric. But really the essence of albums like these that I just showed you, these are blues albums. They really are. And with incredible lyrics. So Bob covering Bo Diddley was not surprising. Forgetful Heart was next, which was a surprising song. It's a song off his Together Through Life album that he put out like in 2009. That album was Bob writing with the great Robert Hunter, who was Jerry Garcia's lyricist. So Bob in 2009 said, hey, you know, I'm a great lyricist, but let's bring in another guy. Maybe we can work off of each other. And that was a special treat to see that song in the 3-spot Forgetful Heart. Even though I'm not quite as familiar with that song, especially if the arrangement's different than the record. You know, it's one of my big takeaways with this evening is you're not getting a greatest hits show. And I know that, seeing Bob so many times, but really even tonight more than ever, he's focusing on his newer material, his new millennium material, and some covers. And that's what we get in the 4th spot, Axe in the Wind, which is a George Wild Child Butler cover. Again, I'm not familiar with this. I did find out and look and do some stats on some of these songs. The 4 covers he played, he's just played on this Outlaw tour. So it's not like he's playing these songs all the time. In fact, Axe in the Wind, he's played 14 times, and that's all on this tour. The Bo Diddley one, 13 times just on this tour. You know, so that's interesting that he's added some covers to his new set for the Outlaw tour. And then we get to Ramona, which is a classic song off of one of his very early albums. In fact, it's off of John Wesley. What is The Other Side of Bob Dylan? So one of his second album. Again, arrangements that are different. We then get early Roman Kings, which is off his 2012 Tempest record. You know, Bob's material in the new millennium has been very critically acclaimed. His most recent, Rough and Wild Ways, you know, these are great albums, and they're highly acclaimed records. Yeah, Rough and Rowdy Ways. We're still on the Rough and Rowdy Waves tour, I think, which started back in 2020. Moving on his set list, we get Under the Red Sky. Again, a more modern song for Dylan. That album was from 1990. It came after the great Oh Mercy album from 89. It maybe wasn't quite as thought of as Oh Mercy. And going back and doing a deep track like that just shows you that Bob's going to do what Bob wants to do with the great musicians that he wants to play with. And, you know, people were responding in the crowd. I think if you've seen Bob Dylan for the first time, the first thing you notice is his voice. He's almost just spitting these lyrics out at you at times, and sometimes he's full-blown crooning, and we'll get into that later in the show. There's times where he's really melodically singing, but I think that you can get a little shocked by his voice, but what you also are shocked by is how good the band is. Bob's playing piano. Bob's not only playing piano, but he's kind of improvising on some of these songs. You get the sense that, yes, they played this song last night in Memphis, but even playing it last night, if Bob wants to start early and kind of keep the band on their toes, he'll do that. If he wants to even change up what he did the night before, he may change up the arrangement slightly in real time for the band to keep himself on his feet, to keep his bandmate on the feet, or to be honest, maybe he just doesn't quite remember how he did it the night before, and that's okay too. It feels fresh, and it feels real, and you never feel like he's just mailing in a greatest hits show. You know, you go see Chicago at the Steeple Theater or whatever, and you're going to get those songs exactly the same every night, just like the album. That's not what you're getting with Bob Dylan's concerts at all. Another cover is next. I'll Make It All Up to You. It's a Charlie Rich song. Again, that's only been played on this tour. All Along the Watchtowers next. And, you know, recently, a couple weeks ago, Billy Strings sat in with Bob Dylan and his band on a version of the great John Wesley Harding classic from 1968. Of course, Hendrix makes it famous. This was more true to the actual song itself, even though he does change up the chorus a little bit. You know, not that there's really a chorus, but he changes up the tempo in the song. And I liked his new version, and I was familiar with it having watched the Billy Strings take from a couple weeks ago. What do we get next? After that legendary song, we get Till I Fell in Love with You. You know, to be honest, again, another song that I'm not real familiar with. Till I Fell in Love with You. I'm trying to see what record that's even. Well, it's off of Time Out of Mind. In fact, we get a couple songs off of Time Out of Mind. Just beautiful versions. Band is just a well-oiled machine that's seeming to be reacting in real time with the whims of what Bob wants to do. There's lots of moving parts in a Bob Dylan show, and you gotta be on your toes too as a listener. I really enjoyed that one. We then get Desolation Row. Desolation Row is off of this classic album, one of the greatest albums of all time, and it's one of my most poignant songs in the history of modern music. And if I have a problem with the Bob Dylan concert, it is making up an arrangement where it's unrecognizable. That one of the songs, for me personally, that means the most to me is irreconcilable. You can't recognize it. You can do it because you know the lyrics, and he's dropping these lyrics in sporadically, and sometimes even seemingly out of time and where they should be in meter. At the same time, the song that he's created, this arrangement that he's created around what's Desolation Row, would work as its own song with different lyrics. So in a way, I'd almost rather him play a song I didn't know than to take a Desolation Row and do what he did to it. And I hate to criticize because I loved Last Night, but that would be a criticism I would have, to the point where I'm glad he didn't play so many classics and then change them. But Desolation Row was played last night. Lovesick, the great song off again, 1997's Time Out of Mind, Grammy-winning album, Time Out of Mind. And then we get a song that I didn't know. I've listened to Bobby Blue Bland's version, and to my knowledge, this is only the song "Share Your Love with Me" has only been played 12 times, and all just on this tour. Bob's voice is in such fine form at this point of the night that it's almost like a lounge singer or a Sinatra or a Tony Bennett crooning through these beautiful lines of this Bobby Bland song. That Bobby's a master singer and composer, and clearly Bob's giving an ode to that. Remember, Bob had that radio show on XM Sirius Radio where he talked about all these great songs and talked about stories and would play deep tracks similar to Tom Petty's show on Sirius XM. These guys are music nuts. They love old records, and Bob's having fun singing other people's music right now. I have no problem with that. That was the highlight of the evening for me. Share Your Love with Me, the Bobby Blue Bland. He then did Blind Willie McTell, which is next, which is off of his bootleg series. It's an older song that he's been playing for years. And then finally, we get the classic Don't Think Twice, It's All Right. And again, he's going to change that up in that arrangement, but, we never did too much talking anyway. I guess I can't say that. Sometimes I ramble on these reviews, and thanks for watching my channel, and subscribe if you like this content. It was neat to see that. I hadn't seen him in 15 years. My father-in-law, who I went with, saw him in September of '65 when his backing band was the Hawks, the original band. He fell in love with that music back then in 1965, and to be able 60 years later for him to see this music with me, and for me, all these years on, starting with that greatest hits album I had in my basement growing up and listening to 10 or 12 songs, and finally seeing him in high school, and then all these years later, it's still a special event. It's still an art piece more than anything. The takeaway for me is it's an art piece. And it's a master doing what he wants to do, still having the audience to do it for. He's not playing in small clubs like some old school artists are. He's not playing in tiny theaters. He's playing bigger places, of course, alongside other legendary people, but it's pretty neat I loved last night's show. Check out my channel. We talk about great music only every day. See ya. Peace.